Good afternoon, Doug Simonian over at New York Metro Weather with their latest video update on the energy and AG weather. This video will mainly be talking about some of the model trends that have gone on over the past several days that have increased confidence in a potential heat wave for parts of the Ohio Valley / Heartland and into the Eastern US for later in the weekend and into early next week. This was last night's European ensemble mean. It's a day 6 forecast, so it's valid for later on Sunday into Monday. We see that out west, it has a pretty large cutoff trough in the Intermountain West, and then that, as a downstream response, leads to a big heat ridge. 591 decameter on an ensemble mean at day 6 is a pretty impressive signal regarding heat. And then any southeast Canada troughing gets somewhat retreated to the north. So you actually get a pretty strong gradient between the departing southeast Canada trough and the heat ridge to the south, which actually leads to more westerly downsloping flow, which actually can make things hotter. So in some ways, the southeast Canada trough goes from a cooling influence to a warming influence as it enhances this gradient, whereas previous runs it was further south, making things cooler. What's interesting is that the model trends have been a classic example of some of the European ensemble model biases. And that's why we can have such high confidence that, despite the model struggling, that this heat ridge is for real. If we go back to the forecast of the European ensembles from several nights ago, this was the 0Z run from June 8th, the day 10 forecast valid for the same period we were just discussing. Look how different it is. The differences are stark. And for the first part, it mainly starts off with this bias the European ensembles have in the long range to have too much troughing coming down out of southeast Canada into the northeastern US, which leads to these big cooler pools and much cooler weather than what would ultimately verify. Granted, yes, the northeast US has not had any big heat yet, so it hasn't been totally off in that respect, but this is something that has been persistent with the European ensembles all spring long with the same bias, and that corrected bias has been fed back by the fact that it also didn't have enough southwestern US troughing. Now that the model's picked up more on the development of Hurricane Bud and it phasing into this southwestern trough, now we see that as time has gone on, the models have been picking up on the southwestern US trough more. So the old forecast, new forecast. That southwestern US trough is a much bigger feature, which leads to more ridging. So that helps to kick out this southeast Canada trough. So the European guidance is correcting. So finally we're seeing real heat being modeled for the Heartland and into the northeast. And we can even see that on a more regional scale from the US. We can just see just how impressive this ridge is. You see the old forecast, big trough, cooler weather. New forecast, big trough out west, heat ridge in the Heartland and into the northeast. And this could lead to some stress in the Heartland. And of course, as said before, this heat will move into the east, and we could actually finally see some 90s in some of the big cities of the northeast as a result of this. And even the GFS ensembles, while they've been more correctly warmer, it also had to make an adjustment with the trough out west. It's the current forecast for Saturday into Sunday, the big ridge, and then prior forecasts, we see that the trough out west, it had an idea of it, but it too even had a little bit too much troughing coming in from southeast Canada. But as it got more coherent with the trough out west, phasing with Hurricane Bert, or the remnants of it, it got more expansive with the heat ridge in the Ohio Valley and into the Heartland, and eventually into the northeast, which has led to some big corrections upward with the GWCDD forecasts overall. This was the European ensembles cooling degree day forecast for the US. Some of the previous runs later last week had the CDD dipping all the way to below average for the 16th to the 19th period based on that big trough diving into the northeast US. But all the runs have gradually trended upward with the CDD thanks to that exact correction we talked about, with more troughing in the southwest and more ridging downstream to the Heartland and to the northeast. So even again in that same period, later this weekend to early next week, the European ensembles once again trended warmer. We do notice a little bit of a cool down, afterward. There could be a little bit overdone on the European ensemble. However, there is some evidence that there could be a little bit of a cool down once an associated cold front does cross, and to kind of tamper down the heat ridge somewhat, because we still are going to get some Western North American ridge retrogression and amplification, which still will lead to a bit more troughing and cooler weather trying to dip into the northern tier at times, which will result in somewhat of a strong cold front cooling things down. And when combined with some of the chilly air still in the southwestern U.S. from that trough, there is some validity to the cool down from a nationwide GWCDD perspective as we move from the 20th into the 21st, 22nd. Though again, I think the European ensemble is probably a little bit overdone with that. But even today's operational GFS, it does show the dip in the GWCDD, and the same has occurred over the last several runs from that cold front crossing, June 18th, 19th, 20th or so. And then we still should probably warm up a bit more again in the long range as ridging in general just becomes more expansive. Yeah, we get that little cool dip. Again, this could be a little bit overdone. The Southeast Canada troughs have been somewhat persistent, but not necessarily a dominating feature. But in general, as retrogression continues, what should happen is that we actually get a little bit of a trough in between this bigger ridging features in the western U.S., which should lead to more expansive ridging in parts of the central U.S., the Southeast Canada trough retreating again, and more nationwide warmth potentially centered in the central U.S. with some downsloping warmth into the eastern U.S., even with a little bit of troughing. This pattern also with the western Atlantic ridge could try to lead to some wetter weather in parts of the eastern U.S. as well, but again, the details regarding that will have to be sorted out as we get closer. Alright, so I hope this video explains why we are confident in the warmer trends for later this weekend to early next week, and also describes the pattern well going forward. So we hope you have a great rest of the afternoon, and we'll talk to you guys soon. Take care.